Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part, too.
In 1959, the controversial but popular sci-fi writer Robert A. Heinlein produced a two-part serial called Starship Soldier in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. This two-part serial would be combined and republished as Starship Troopers. Heinlein's critics have described him as a militarist, a fascist, and a reactionary. Starship Troopers was written quickly as a response to the US and USSR suspending nuclear tests after the fallout from tests in the Bikini Atoll, especially one that killed a Japanese fisherman who happened to be in the area. Starship Troopers takes place in a future society where Earth is run by a military elite called the Terran Federation. This federation arose after a huge war between the US, British, and Russians and the Chinese hegemony, a second Cold War. Only those people who have done federal service like military or intelligence work hold citizenship and can vote and hold public office. Heinlein claims that in this society, racial and gender distinctions have fallen away as the spirit of militarism prevails. The human race is at war with an alien species called bugs or arachnids who come originally from the planet Klendathu. The novel follows a young Filipino man named Johnny Rico who joins the mobile infantry after high school and works his way up through the ranks. While Johnny Rico is being trained, an attack from the bugs destroys Buenos Aires and kills Rico's mother. Johnny joins the platoon known as Ratchek's Roughnecks, working his way up to second lieutenant. The novel is interspersed with Heinlein's thoughts on the inevitability of militarism, moral decline of the 1950s, capital and corporal punishment, and the right to vote. Two of the biggest critics of the book, Starship Troopers, were Paul Verhoeven and Edward Neumeier. Verhoeven and Neumeier had been the director and the writer of RoboCop, which correctly predicted the militarization of police departments during the Reagan era.
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply.
I think you'd better do what he says, Mr. Kenny.
You now have 15 seconds to comply. You are in direct violation of Penal Code 113, Section 9. You now have 5 seconds to comply.
Neumeier had been up for vice president at Universal and had given it up to become a screenwriter working on RoboCop. Verhoeven and Neumeier hated Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, believing it was fascist militaristic propaganda. And so they had to adapt it into a movie at one of the strangest possible times.
And I think what the critics at that time absolutely did not see, that there was a double narrative, isn't it? There is a narrative really which is saying these are wonderful guys and they fight for their country and they are really heroes and they're supporting each other and they're wonderful and they go to win. And it is one of the last things of the movie is saying they'll fight and they will win, basically. And so that element was coming, of course, of the original novel by Robert Heinlein. So it was not something we invented. We took that from the novel. That was the first narrative. But there was a second narrative that was at Neumeier, was the writer of the movie, and John Davidson, the producer, and me, where we were also fighting with the book. Because the book of Robert Heinlein, one of the, at that time, important science fiction writers, is militaristic and fascist. I mean, his philosophy is that way. And our philosophy was really different. Still, we wanted to tell the story of a really wonderful, adventurous story about these young boys and girls fighting bugs, but we also wanted to show that these people are really in their heart, or without knowing it, I would say, they're on their way to fascism.
Verhoeven and Neumeier's adaptation of Starship Troopers was developed in the late 90s, at a time when the Cold War was over, the Soviets had been defeated, and people like Fukuyama were calling it the end of history. That's right, we're talking about the classic 1997 Verhoeven sci-fi satire, Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers is Verhoeven and Neumeier's more left-wing sensibilities in dialogue with the Heinlein book. And that's done by making the movie into a military recruitment film from this universe.
Out of the ashes of Buenos Aires comes first sorrow, then anger.
The only good bug is a dead bug.
This allows for an incredibly over-the-top treatment of the original work. Like in RoboCop, the movie is intercut with newsreels, TV reels including for a live execution, and a crossfire-like TV show debating whether bugs can have intelligence.
When a colony reaches a certain size, 300 generations or something, it gets smarter.
Insects with intelligence? Have you ever met one? I can't believe I am hearing this nonsense.
You just
this
wait
is the most
a
ridiculous
moment.
conversation I have ever had.
There is some kind of bug that we haven't seen yet. A leadership caste, a hive brain.
Brain bugs? Frankly, I find the idea of a bug that thinks offensive.
Verhoeven cast an assortment of actors from daytime TV and soap operas. Casper Van Dien as Rico, Neil Patrick Harris as his psychic spook friend Carl, Denise Richards, Dina Myers, who had been on Beverly Hills 90210, Patrick Muldoon from Days of Our Lives and Saved by the Bell, as well as Michael Ironsides and Dean Norris. Young, good-looking, kind of superficial cast members who would make the backbone of fascist military propaganda in a future society. All of the older military members are missing limbs, grizzled, and have been through hell. The war has ravaged multiple generations as they struggle on, yet indoctrinated students like Rico, Carl, and Carmen are completely nonplussed by it.
Infantry, sir.
Good for you. Mobile infantry made me the man I am today.
Michael Ironside, playing Rodchick, missing an arm already when we first see him as their teacher, indoctrinates his students with the knowledge that force is necessary and all power, political or otherwise, derives from it. Non-citizens can't vote, in Rodchick's words, because voting itself is an expression of force.
Something given has no value. Look, when you vote, you are exercising political authority. You're using force. And force, my friends, is violence. The supreme authority from which all other authority is derived.
My mother always said violence never solves anything.
Really? I wonder what the city fathers of Hiroshima would say about that.
Being released in the late 90s, when history was supposed to have ended, Starship Troopers was not seen as satire. Critics hated it, believing it to be a fascist Nazi film. It was believed that America's militaristic Cold War posture was over.
Well, at that time, it was in general by the certainly by American critics, but later in Europe was the same situation. It was bashed because it was accused of being neo-fascist or neo-Nazi. In fact, in big American newspapers, not even as a review, as a film review, but as a redactional article, I think was Washington Post or Wall Street Journal, where they said that this is a very dangerous movie because it promotes fascism and Nazism, and these two, the writer and the director, are neo-fascist.
However, 4 years later, the September 11th attack happened. The aftermath of 9/11 caused Starship Troopers to be reevaluated.
But I think it took a couple of years. It was, I won't say because that sounds horrible, but it was, of course, after what happened in New York, that people were starting to look at the movie in a bit different way. I think, so I would say the beginning of the 21st century.
The bugs throwing a meteor at Buenos Aires, the smoldering city and the drums of war that followed, the over-the-top jingoistic mood that surrounded America and the West after 9/11 was reminiscent of the war fever in the wake of the Buenos Aires attack in Starship Troopers. The dehumanization of the bugs, the only good bug is a dead bug, is a familiar pattern, one that can be seen in feverish nationalistic attitudes during the Bush administration. Starship Troopers, like many of Verhoeven's films, is now seen as a polarizing but beloved cult classic.
It's afraid. It's afraid!